Dave Parody here with another slide makeover video podcast based on the ideas in my book, The Visual Slide Revolution. Today's slide comes to us from a presentation I was at last week, an investment presentation on a particular real estate investment. And as I was watching, I saw this slide and it confused me a bit. Here's essentially the slide that I saw. I want to focus on the bottom part there. And what happened was they put the slide up, they talked about the various points, and I was intrigued at the equation or the calculation down at the bottom. And I wasn't entirely sure what it meant, nor why these arrows were around it. And eventually he did get to explaining that the bottom calculation is how they determine the value of a property. And it has to do with the $100,000 of net operating income. That's what the NOI stands for. And you divide that by the capital rate, or they call it cap rate, that you expect. And it's really a risk-adjusted rate. So the riskier the capital, the higher the rate you're going to require in terms of determining your value. So when you do that calculation, you get $1 million value. And what the arrows indicated was when you change those parameters, what happens. So what I want to do is I want to show you how to address, if you are showing a calculation, which happens in a number of cases when you're talking about financial information, and you want to show what's the effect of changing various parameters in the calculation. How do you do that more effectively? Because this was just all put up at one time, and it was a little confusing until he got to explaining it. So let me show you how I would redo this slide, and I'll present it sort of the way that I think it should be presented. Folks, when we look at the value of a property, there are two ways of increasing that value. Either you can increase the rent or you can improve the quality of the income. And let's take this step by step. So first of all, let's look at how we determine the value of a property. Let's say we're getting $100,000 in rent, which is our net operating income after all expenses have been paid. So $100,000 is what we get from our rental income. And we require a 10% capital rate, meaning that the riskiness of this income is such that we require it to produce for us, it needs to be a 10% return on the investment or value that we place on this asset, this piece of real estate. So when we do the calculation, $100,000 net operating income divided by a 10% cap rate is $1 million value. Now, the question is, how do we go about increasing the value of that property? And there are two basic ways that we can do it. The first way is to increase the income by increasing the rent. So if we increase our rent, then we increase our net operating income. So let's take a look at that. So if we increase the net operating income by increasing our rent to $110,000, then we keep the same cap rate because the rent hasn't changed in terms of who it's coming from, so the quality hasn't changed. But we now do our equation in $110,000 net operating income divided by a 10% cap rate is an increased value. So now we're up to $1.1 million. So that's one way we can increase the total value by increasing the income. The other way we can do it is to reduce the capital rate by increasing the quality of the income. So if the income is of higher quality, we don't require as high a return on our money. So we can then have a greater value to that asset. So in this case, if we reduce the cap rate to 9%, so we've increased the quality, so we change some of the tenants and we increase the quality of the income. We still have the same income, $100,000, but the cap rate is now down to 9%. We don't require as high a return. So now when we do our equation, $100,000 net operating income divided by a 9% cap rate, our value is now $1.11 million, increased from before. So you can see that there are two ways to increase value. So what I've done in that slide is taken the equation and the arrows and broke it out into what the real point is for the audience, separated it from the other points on the slide. In this way, somebody who's watching, I can explain the information and they can get it a whole lot easier than before. So here are the lessons that we want to learn from this slide makeover on how do we show changes in a calculation and do it visually. First lesson is you need to give context initially. So in the redone slide, I just had the equation plain and simple, nothing else, and I explained it without all the arrows, because people need to have context first before you talk about any of the changes. And then I used builds to manage the information that I was discussing and the flow of information to the audience. If I have everything up there at the start, it becomes very hard for them to understand which way I'm going. So I use the builds to manage that. Arrows are a very good visual way to show increase or decrease. It's a simple visual, but it shows direction of change, direction of movement. So I use the arrows to increase the income or the value or decrease the cap rate. And finally, in a new calculation, I think you need to use a caption, which would be sort of a subtitle or subheading, to tell them what is it that this calculation is showing you. So that's why I had the yellow subheadings, in order for people to know what it is we changed, what effect that would be, why was this important to be thinking about. So if you want more information on the book, Visual Slide Revolution, go to the website www.visualsliderevolution.com for more information on my training, consulting, videos, and other ways that I can help you transform overloaded text slides or unclear slides into persuasive visuals. Go to my website at www.ThinkOutsideTheSlide.com. It's been another Slide Makeover video podcast. Take care.